Hi, Sally Foley-Lewis here with another in our Spark series of videos, chatting with the amazing senior leaders around our globe on the topic of self-leadership and how to fire up your self-leadership and maybe even how to fire up your people's self-leadership as well. And today I'm absolutely honoured and privileged to be having a conversation with David Pace, who is a Deputy Director in the energy industry. And David and I actually met on Clubhouse talking about leadership and particularly self-leadership. So I reached out and asked him if I could pick his brains a little bit more around this whole topic. So thank you, David, and welcome to the Spark series.
Oh, thank you very much. And I know looking forward to a conversation. I expect I'll learn a lot. So I was excited to have a chance to talk to you.
Oh, thank you. So let's explore. I'd love to know from you, what's your definition of self-leadership?
Right. So to some extent, it was given to me. We have some management training, leadership training in my workplace. And they're one of these courses, if you will, described this principle of self-leadership and basically said, think of how you treat yourself as a direct report. So you might have a way that you conduct yourself or a way that your personality engages with others, and your supervisor maybe has identified that it needs to go in a particular way. And so how are they going to influence you or maybe guide you or mentor you and get you to where they think you can be more effective? And so then, the more I think about that, the more I think of that as kind of a series of answering the how questions. So people who maybe get into leadership positions or even technically in management positions, they have a certain ambition, they have goals or objectives, things they want to build or see or achieve. And so that's their what and that's their why. But then the how is, what approach do I have to have? How do I know my own weaknesses and my strengths? And how do I apply those to get there? And that all manifests through what I would at least call self-leadership.
Yeah, I love that. I think that pulling apart of the what, why, and how is really helpful. I think that it can break a really big and daunting concept for a new leader down into, okay, if I compartmentalize this process, this will help me at least give me the steps to work towards being the best leader I can be and starting with self. So I really appreciate that, breaking that down into those parts. And I think you're right. There's those pieces around self-awareness and understanding my motivators and understanding my drivers and how my values impact on that and my beliefs impact on that. Because that will also filter into and be sometimes the bridge to the why as well, I think. So that when we're working on the how and we're working on our self-leadership, if we take that time to really reflect on, well, what are my values and how do I want my values to show up in this particular work I'm doing, then that can actually link to the why and be a motivator around the whys and the whats, if that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because I'm in a technical field, but how comes up a lot because, you worry about saying, well, I have a hammer, so now every problem is a nail. And in many cases, if you're in a research endeavor, you need to invent something. You have to be careful. You can't just say, well, okay, I have the hammer, so I'm going to go around and strike everything because, you actually have a problem which exists outside of your tool set. And the same thing, applies to individuals, that the problem is unaware and doesn't care about your strengths and weaknesses, but it has a certain way it can be solved. And then you need to figure out a way to get there if you want to do something about it.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great metaphor with the hammer, and I really appreciate the fact that even you can identify that your particular world of work is so technical, and so that you can see that quite often the how is showing up more for you. Whereas if I was having this conversation with someone who is maybe the head of like a community services, family services type of role, there would be a different, I would imagine, I'm just assuming, a different kind of lens in which they look through predominantly. So that's really kind of cool. Thank you for that. I think I'm learning more than you today. So thank you. This is cool. So, what, from your perspective, what impact does self-leadership have on elements of self, like confidence, influence, and courage?
I, the issue of confidence comes up a lot, and again, this is kind of a personal experience and a group experience in kind of STEM field, science, technology, engineering, math fields. Because in terms of self-leadership, I immediately think about imposter syndrome and think about how self-leadership will build a lot of courage, but not until you make that first step, not until you hit some threshold of courage where you're willing to acknowledge that I can guide myself. I can properly assess my strengths and my weaknesses, my foundation, and I can properly determine the difference between my foundation and kind of what I need to have to do what I want to do. And, especially if you're a graduate student, if you're an early career scientist or researcher, if you have these feelings of imposter syndrome, of thinking I'm skating by, I'm beating the system somehow, then most likely you're going to really lean heavily on mentors. And so you see this, whether it's your thesis advisor, whether it's a senior researcher when you're employed postgraduate. And to some extent, that first effort into kind of self-guidance and self-leadership, you might pause or delay getting there because you think, I got to go to the source. There's an expert and it's not me. And once you get past that, though, and you're willing to say, okay, what do I want to do? How am I self-directed? How do I have a drive and application? How do I get there? And then you do it and the world doesn't fall apart and you don't flunk out of school. Maybe you pass that exam or you have a very good discussion at a meeting. And then all of a sudden you start saying, okay, where else can I direct myself? How do I improve? How do I say it's okay maybe that I need to work on an area? Now what I need to do is get myself going into whatever training or access I need. So with confidence, I think it really starts to build it, because then it's experience. You start to have some successes. You say, okay, I have a wheelhouse. I have a specialty that I'm good at, and something I'm not good at, I'm either going to work with people who are and leverage their strengths, or I'm going to develop it myself. But when I think of something like influence or courage, I really lean towards less technical areas in that regard. And now I'm thinking about how you might say, for instance, if you're in a workplace and you're in a managerial role, so now you're talking about direct reports, interpersonal issues, and so forth. And you might say, I know to address this problem, maybe you have some type of undesirable work environment situation or even a hostile environment. Well, there's the human resources element that you ship off to them and let them handle professionally, and as in many places you're legally required. But then there's just the concept of what kind of environment should my team be in? What kind of environment should I work in? What kind of environment should I be helping to create and maintain? And, and through self-leadership, you say to yourself, here's the approach I need to have. Here is how I address this issue in the way I conduct myself and the opportunities that I give to people. And that's the kind of thing where the lack of courage approach is to very easily say, I filled out the form and I filed it and now we're done. But you can tell yourself, where do I want to be? How do I get there? Is through certain behaviors or proactive measures. And then self-leadership can help you get there. And so kind of when I think of this, I think on the technical side, building your confidence through actually improving yourself or by putting yourself through various measures and achievements. But then on the courage and the influence side, I really think of just dealing on a person-to-person basis and in a group and just saying, I know how I want us to be. And now what do I have to change about myself to lead us there?
Yeah. I really appreciate that distinction between those two, confidence here through activity and measuring and hitting milestones, probably in that technical sort of arena. And it's interesting you say, when you were saying that, I was going through probably about 10 years ago, I had a very dear friend say to me, so Sally, how many certificates do you need before you realize you've got it? And so, when you were saying that, it's like, busted. I'm a course junkie and an accreditation junkie. And while I'll still do them, I'm far more conscious about why I'm doing them. And yeah, sure, the imposter syndrome might show up every now and again, but I guess it is that moment, that tipping point, I guess, for some people where, okay, at what point is it okay for me to stand up with a little less support, not zero support, but a little less support, and speak up and speak my expertise to this, and take a deep breath and see what happens with it, because, not everyone's going to agree, and that's okay. But then when you also talked about how the influence and the courage side are very more human and more one-on-one, and I really appreciate that distinction. And I think also when you were talking about filling in the check the box, it's like, yep, just wash my hands of that problem. Really, how much does that also impact on how you see yourself in the team, and what positive part does that play with the team? Do you get more involved as a means to be helpful, or do you actually stay out as a means of preservation? And I think I've seen in some situations where quite junior managers will step into being part of the group and part of the gossiping and part of the mateship of it all. And in their mind, it's about trying to be one of and trying to have a good relationship, but it backfires because they've lost some credibility around their leadership and their authority. But also, when I've had a conversation with some of them, it's a case of, actually, I really didn't enjoy getting into the gossip of it. It's not really what I wanted to do. But I felt like that's how I had to be in order to have a good relationship. And so their own self-leadership in that moment is they should have trusted their gut. They should have listened to themselves, and stayed out of it, and maybe even encouraged it to stop. So yeah, I really appreciate those two distinctions there. Thank you, David. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you talk about junior management. It makes me think about, I used to have this very oversimplified theory about upper, very high management, which was that most of their decisions were based on a desire to reduce their frustration. And so sometimes we've been in situations, all of us have, I think, where maybe someone is a little tight with sharing information. And part of that you would think is that, pardon me, or as I thought, is that that's a way of reducing their frustration. Because of course, when you need to get something done, if you just say, go do this, and you go do it and nobody knows what you're doing, well, then no one's in your way. And this is a role where, again, to kind of have self-leadership and say, but what's more important, right? What's my fundamental limitation, how much I can achieve as one person, whether I'm a director, a vice president, a president, or whatever. And the issue is, and this is true in every field, and of course it's true in scientific fields, that the team of 10 does way more than 10 times what a single individual does. This is, the very definition of synergy, of getting more out of than the sum of the parts. And so it really applies at all levels, which is this ability to be able to say kind of what's this, it doesn't even necessarily have to be an ideal, but you can think of it as, what's this ideal that I'm trying to get to? How do I get there? Well, minimizing my frustration is not a way to get there, because I might get more done on paper. But again, like you say, that's just checking boxes. And so you really have to be able to take that look and apply that self-leadership to say, what do I need to change about me, or what is the best way to get there, or what's the best team inclusive way to get there? And those are all very different kinds of things that are easy to just ignore otherwise.
Yeah, it's sometimes not easy to work on ourselves, is it? Take a big deep breath. We've got some work to do. So, particularly when we're comfortable. Why would I make myself uncomfortable? Right. But that's growth, and because on the other side of that icky kind of stuff, that uncomfortableness, that actual shift and change, can be some really great outcomes, and can be some really positive interactions that I've seen people go from being really toxic managers, and I've been brought in to manage them. Been brought in because I'm the last stop before you're being booted out, and which I don't necessarily like. That's how coaching is used, but let's face it, that's how it's used sometimes. And I'm straight up with the manager, and I'm just saying, you do get that I'm the only thing standing between you and employment right now. And they look at me and they're just like, right, now let's get down to work. And when you see them transition from being quite toxic and really lacking a huge amount of self-awareness, and we get into understanding their values, their motivators, their emotional intelligence, and we work on these elements of their self-leadership and move them through, because it's not just that. I think one of the things that gets missed is that if you've got a manager who's been really toxic or behaving in one way, and then they start shifting their behavior, one of the questions that comes up, and it doesn't really get dealt with very well by many people, is that, well, what will the team think of me now that I'm different? And that's been really interesting. And so we work on that as well, and say they're going to love you. Like, they're actually going to respect you because you've taken a deep breath and you've seen the work that needs to be done, and you've done it. And so we work on that, and then to come out the other side of it, the productivity goes up from the team, the respect is there, the loyalty is there, the information flows a lot better. So it's really a fascinating transition, isn't it, when you can see that happen?
Right, absolutely.
So I guess then, that's when we're working on our self-leadership, and that's an internal thing. What about when something else, like an event, and let's say, this little tiny thing that's been bothering us lately called COVID-19, but, you take a big world event like that, or even any sort of significant event, even in an industry, and it's thrown you. And maybe you can think of an event, and you don't necessarily have to talk about that. But my question is, how do you reignite your spark? How do you get yourself back up? And what are some of the lessons you've learned from going through that?
Right. The first thing I think about, and so I do have an example that comes to mind that is specific to the energy industry, is that it's really about realigning yourself into how you fit. I think we know, from organizational behavior, that people, especially in technical roles, when they become unhappy with their job role, in many cases, they leave to go do the same job somewhere else. Mm-hmm. Right. And that their primary motivations are not things like compensation, but really being upset about the difference between their job description and what they actually do, and mm-hmm. things like that. Mm-hmm. And so, you can lose your spark in that regard, and saying, I'm not doing what I'm supposed to do or what I signed on to do. And so then how do you find that alignment again to where, oh, this is what I want to do, and this is what I'm actually doing? In our industry, we have this constant tension between essentially putting electricity on the grid, or say a product, and then the research that will make it better, but might not make it better for 5 years or 15 years or even 30 years from now. And so you can probably imagine you have people who really, really love either of those roles. I want to build widgets, and this year I built 100 widgets. And if I can help design the system that makes 1,000 widgets, that's my groove. Or the people who just say, I want to understand how to make a better widget, and I won't have that design for 10 years, but that's what I want to do. And so at one point, and in fact, so I was in energy, and I left and went to work in the defense industry instead. And part of it was that I personally just felt these goals at the large level are so jumbled. There isn't a place for me to participate. And in a way, I was very lucky. I had a very good experience in my alternative. And then as the industry changed, I had a chance to come back, where the specific charge for my role was to actually lead some of the changes that perfectly aligned with exactly what I wanted to do personally, what I believe is good for the workforce, in this industry. And just boom, it was back. I felt that the flow was that way. I was paddling that way. So everything was moving in the same direction. And that's really, if I try to think now, because I say, well, then that should fit into my framework of the how. And I think it actually does, because you think that this is how I fit into this larger machination, if you will. This is how I fit into this whole industry. This is how I know I'm going to work with this group and that group and this team and my people and all the people who work at these other institutions. And that's really what it came down to. And so you'll notice something like COVID, I would imagine, operates in exactly the same way, in the sense that we have a flow, whether it's that we really enjoy seeing our colleagues face to face, day after day, maybe just, a few days a week, or what have you, and then something changes that and we don't see how we fit. Because how am I effective when I can only talk to you through a video conference? Or maybe, especially in the first couple of months of the pandemic, maybe I'm only talking to you through email and written documents. And all these things that I think I contribute, this hypothetical version of me, relating to my sense of humor or the way that we brainstorm or any of these things. And then how do I fit? And all of a sudden, so many of my motivations are gone, because the way that I was getting to where I wanted to go has been fundamentally changed. And so I don't know how we realign with something like COVID. For instance, if you don't like technology, if you don't like video conferencing, that's probably really hard to turn around. But certainly in other ways, if you can find your realignment, you find your place. And I know that sounds cliche and it sounds maybe oversimplified, but really there are many just fundamental changes that you can make over the course of a week or a month, where you say, yes, this is what I'm good at doing, or here's something I'm not so good at doing, but I want to learn. And now this industry provides that opportunity because that's what they're looking to do. Or, my company needs this type of role. And then you can get back on track.
Yeah. And there's two things that came out of what you just shared just then for me. And the second one is being able to say, well, I don't like the fact that I have to just do this via a lens now, but it's the only option I've got at the moment. It's about that realization, I think, isn't it? That just says, if I'm still wanting to be a contributor and I still want to do my job, and most people do want to do a good job too. Most people don't go to work to go, how can I ruin it for everyone today? There's obviously one or two in the world, but most people really do want to do a really good job. And so tapping back into that sense of yourself and saying, okay, well, this is not my preferred platform, but it's the only one I've got right now until things change again. This is what I've just got to get proficient enough to, and then we can go from there and incrementally improve. So I think that's a really, really valid point that I don't know if a lot of people had a chance to think way back in March last year, when all of a sudden it was lockdown. And, it reminded me of many years ago, I was working out in the central bit of Queensland, in Australia, in the outback. And my boss was 800 kilometers away, which is something like 600 something miles away. And so I had a tradesman that was coming to fix the hot water system. And I said, can I work from home? Because this tradesman has given me, I'll be there between 9 and 5. Because that narrows it down and helps me, that old chestnut that we always get. And the boss had a conniption. It was, well, you need to go into the office early and put a sign up and make sure the phones are diverted and make sure no one knows and sees you. And if you can, and as soon as the tradesman comes and finished, go back into the office. And it was, you thought I'd asked her to hand over her firstborn, because it was just such a big deal to work from home for one day. I really should have just asked for a recreation day. That would have been much easier in hindsight. Whereas you get something like a little thing called COVID, and all of a sudden we're home like that. And not that I wish that negativity or that sort of impact on us, but to me, it demonstrates that we actually have got the capacity to adjust. And I think that's been a silver lining and a gift for individuals to say, okay, I don't have to like it, but it has taught me that I can adjust and I can do this. And I think that's been a really big thing. Now, there was something else you said about, so you were in the energy industry and then you left and then came back. And I think that's something that's really worth thinking about. if things aren't aligned, if it's not flow for you, and if it's, you're not showing up at work, I'm not saying this is you, I'm just saying as an example, if things aren't sitting well, then it's okay to go out and maybe come back later, because I bet you've come back with so much more insight and so much more worldly experience and so much more maturity and so much more, even your thinking would have been expanded because you've actually been in a different arena and then come back. So I think that some people who feel as though they can't leave, I think that's worth exploring as an option. I think it's a great.
Right. I appreciate that you bring that up, because really it's intimidating to leave. It's a slow process. In my case, it was about a 3-year process, right, for all the reasons that you mentioned, that you built up an expertise. Of course, you went that way in the beginning because you had some passion for some particular kind of science or the field. But you realize, again, another aspect of hindsight, you look back on it and say, okay, this was it. This was me looking at it saying, what do I want to achieve and how do I get there? And you eventually realize this is a step that needs to happen. And then, because I'm fortunate and I had a positive experience in the defense industry and now a positive experience back in energy, I can say, wow, well, that was just a fantastic move. Everybody should do that. And, maybe that's not accurate, but still it's really impactful, as you noted.
Yeah, and you're right. It might not be quite so positive for other people. However, to me, I don't want to be Pollyanna about it, but even if you do leave and that next one's not great, but the next one might be better, you're building on your experiences and you're building on your maturity and you're building, if you're open to that awareness, so that maybe there's a realization that you never want to go back, or maybe it just helps confirm I have to get back, because I'll come back a different way, and maybe if, for example, it hadn't changed back in industry, in energy or whatever industry you're going back to, but maybe you come back changed and you're ready and you can see it in a different light. So I think you're right. We can't just assume it's going to be great for everyone, but I think the more open we are in ourselves to seeing that, not just the world changes, but we change too. Yeah. Yeah. Right. That's gold. Thank you. Yeah. So how do you help your people fire up their self-leadership?
So this is an area where the theory and the practice can be very different. If I try to apply the same principle that we do for coaching in general, for coaching for success, maybe is what some of these courses would be called, where someone comes to you with an issue and you have to triage it, which is that you say, is this the kind of problem where it's a coachable moment and I can somehow direct this person to resolve it on their own? Or is this the kind of problem that just needs either an immediate decision, or maybe it needs some sort of authoritarian backing in order to make progress? And similar to self-leadership, you have to see these opportunities and say, is this a moment where this particular person has a real growth opportunity here? And then how do I foster that, or how do I bring that going? And so just like with the coaching example or the problem solving example in general, it is about giving space, giving encouragement and space. And it can be very specific. This doesn't have to be an ethereal, go think about yourself in the universe. This can be very specific. For instance, if there's an issue, I think most people, when they get into management and you have direct reports, one of the first problems you'll experience, or the first problem brought to you, will be an interpersonal conflict. So say someone from your group has an issue, maybe with someone in the finance unit, and they're not getting the data they need or something like that. So they come to you, and they're coming to you because they want you to force the issue. And this is, please give me this authoritative decision, where you tell them to give me what I'm asking for, and then we're done. And if you think about it, and this won't always be the case, but in sometimes maybe it's your person's approach, and that they have more of an adversarial, independent approach to this other group, when in reality, we're all in the same company, we're all in the same firm and on the same team. Well, so there's your moment to fire up some self-leadership by encouraging this person to, again, think about how they should interact with our colleagues, and which is, to say, maybe you do it by asking questions the same way you would if you were coaching for problem solving, which is to say, well, how are you approaching the discussion? Or, are you aware of whatever rules or processes they have that, of course, would have been designed without thinking about our group because they're internal to their group, and maybe that's tying someone's hands or preventing them from giving it the information to you the way that you want it. So just think about, what is your approach with them? Are you being demanding or having some type of customer approach with them? Or are there things actually that you can do to help them get what you need? And if you do it right, and again, the theory is a lot easier than the practice, but if you get it right, then you've helped someone develop a strategy for approaching problems, and especially for interpersonal issues, which is thinking about, what is my approach to this? Is it perhaps something about my communication style, or even just my assumptions about the organization that maybe could benefit from some adjustment? And I think there's nothing more motivating than, and I know, again, right, this is a phrase, and you hear this phrase so much because it's so valuable, that empowering people it fires them up in many ways, including their self-leadership. If you've now given someone an example, they don't leave a week later having resolved the problem themselves and say, oh, wow, my boss sure did a great job coaching me to a solution. No, they say, wow, I got some good advice, but I thought about it and I found the right way forward. And now that can be addictive. That can be something that someone wants to do again, not to mention the fact that you can really steamroll through your day being productive if you're able to solve issues like that. So theoretically, that is my approach, trying to encourage people to think about their own platform as they have issues, and how they might spring from that platform, or how they might even adjust their stance to resolve them. And then for the people that have some success with it, you'll find that they become very motivated to say, well, if I learned from that issue, then where else could I improve? Maybe other people who come to me and think that I'm their roadblock, maybe it's because of their perspectives, and now I can have a different type of interaction with that person. And maybe I wish I could keep statistics on how often that approach is successful, but at least it's an approach that I try and I have seen successful on occasion.
And I think in a day-to-day basis where there's so many things happening, and your head's down doing your work, and then you're confronted with this direct report who wants you to fix something. It's almost that sliding door moment of going, fix it or coach it, and taking the deep breath to catch yourself to be able to say, this is a coachable moment. And not go, I don't have time for this. I don't have time for this. Let me just fix it. Because that's the reality as well. I mean, it is much quicker and faster in the moment to fix it, but that's a short-term gain. And I have to agree with you that when we do empower people, they walk away going, I've realized, and you sitting there going, well, I asked the question. I asked the question, but their success is our success when we think of it from a leadership perspective. So you've got to take the credit in the fact that they're empowered, and the fact that they can say, I had this realization, and there's a light bulb moment, which can last a long time, which is fantastic. Yeah, I love that. Thank you. So we're just about out of time. I've got one more question for you, and that is, what is the one thing you wish you knew about self-leadership when you first stepped into a leadership role?
Right. I think one of the themes throughout our discussion right here has really been kind of mindfulness. And there's some aspect of that to self-leadership, because it is taking those seconds or minutes and just saying, where am I coming from? What am I basing that on, compared to maybe what I would like to be basing that on, where I'd like to be approaching. And one of the things that I didn't appreciate coming into and in management specifically, right? So now dealing with resources and how to allocate them, was kind of the difference between a fast decision and a good decision. and really in line with what you just said, you have this pressure, which is that if I complete 20 tasks today, that's way better than if I complete 5. That's way better. And so when these things come at me, if there is a simple solution, I'm going to stamp it and move it on, and I've done great and everybody's happy. But and especially in an area like research, these decisions have ramifications down the road. And now you, as a leader, in particular a leader, when you get to maybe influence vision and long-term planning, you have to kind of think about that process as it flies through this longer timeline. So your solutions and your contributions are not always limited to the next 24 hours or the next work week, as some of them have impacts. And so where self-leadership and mindfulness play into that is that when you have these moments as you're thinking about a problem or you're thinking about an opportunity, you're thinking about something exciting, the difference in saying this is something I can think about for a day versus this is something that needs to be sent away in the next few minutes, that even when it's not apparent in the beginning, that can make a big difference in kind of the ultimate quality of what you decide.
Yeah.
And a willingness to think further. And this isn't just about, well, delaying out of fear, you'll make the wrong choice. This is just more about saying what's really at play here. It's kind of almost if you think of what's the root cause of why this is an issue, or if you just think about, is this an issue that fits into what I want to achieve and what we want to achieve as an organization longer down the road? And so the ability to sit and think, this challenge or this opportunity that's come up, am I equipped to handle it? How could I be equipped to handle it? How can our team evolve to handle it? How can our team evolve to handle this class of problem, right? So not this specific problem in finishing this issue, but kind of when similar items come down the road, how are we now ready? And that's the good decision. The good decision is the one that preemptively solves the problem when it comes back. You know, the good decision is the one that prepares you to take advantage of an opportunity that you don't know is out there yet. And so then that happens on the individual level as well. And that's something that, you know, even to this day, I'm still learning to appreciate, which is about the way to consider problems, to consider your biases and your initial approach to the problem versus, again, what might be the ideal approach to the problem. And then how can you adjust yourself to get there and to get there more regularly? And, you know, I think a certain amount of calm and maybe being determined kind of comes naturally as we gain experience. But in the beginning, you just think, I'm going to knock these problems out and everybody's going to be so happy. And really, on paper, you're doing great, but you'll still be doing great if you had a better solution the next day in many cases.
I'm giggling. I'm giggling because I feel as though you must have seen me in my very first leadership role. I was like a bull in a china shop. I had to get everything done so quickly, and I didn't. I needed to calm down. I needed to slow down. I needed to breathe and think more. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, and, you know, there's also a very personal aspect of that, which is that the calming down part and the taking a breath part is also making sure that you get your full development out of that experience. That, you know, I think probably people would be challenged to say, how did signing the past 20 documents or approvals, how did signing that document improve you in any way? And it didn't. But the thought process behind its assembly, behind who made various decisions, behind what analyses or thoughts you put into it, all of those things did improve you. But what you get credit for is signing it at the end and checking it off the list.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thank you so much. I think that's such an important piece to remember, is to like you said, the mindfulness and taking that time to think and look at your approach and hold off to make sure you give yourself that space for that, as opposed to, and I think you did say, you know, you're not delaying because of fear, but you're delaying so that you're thorough. You know, they're my words to what you said. And I really, really appreciate that. And again, as I said, I was giggling because it was like you were talking about me when I first got into a leadership role. Oh dear. Hopefully nobody's too terribly scarred from their experience of my leadership. But, you know, I think if there's anything out of this, I've learned. So, yeah. Good. David, any last words you'd like to share on self-leadership?
No, really. I would thank you for interacting with me about it. What I like about this is, in fact, this interaction is the perfect example of what I think improves my ability to think about where I am where I want to go and how I'll get there. So I really appreciate your time and thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, David, so much. And there's another Spark series video for us. Thank you, David Pace, who is a deputy director in the energy industry. I'm Sally Foley-Lewis, and I am so excited to be able to bring this series of videos and to explore these whole concepts of self-leadership with a whole range of senior leaders around the globe. Thank you so much for watching, and bye for now.